The propeller slowed with a grinding sigh as the plane rolled to a halt at the edge of the tarmac. Its faded paint was chipped, streaked with grime, and its engine made a sound that felt too tired to threaten anyone. Then the cockpit door creaked open, and a woman stepped out in frame. Gray-streaked braid, old boots hitting the ground with quiet certainty. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She simply moved with the kind of calm that didn't ask permission. Her olive jacket was sun-bleached and frayed at the cuffs, the kind you'd find in a thrift store bin. No badge, no insignia. She looked like someone who delivered mail in places no one remembered existed. Guards were already surrounding her. Boots stomped, radios crackled. One officer barked orders while another raised his phone and laughed. A live stream was running, picking up the jeers. The woman didn't flinch. A young voice joked that she looked like someone's grandma playing pilot. A second voice chimed in saying she must have stolen the plane from a museum. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Someone called her a national threat in garage sale gear. She stood still as they cuffed her hands behind her back and yanked her flight bag open. Inside they found a protein bar, a stack of hand-drawn maps, and a photo of a child. A soldier held the photo up and grinned for the feed. Then it happened. Without warning, the main doors to the hangar opened and the sound of polished shoes echoed across the concrete. A black SUV idled just outside its engine still running. A man in a dark suit stepped into the light. His face gave nothing away, but his posture stopped everyone cold. He walked straight toward the woman. No glance to the guards, no hesitation. He stopped in front of her, eyes locked with hers. Then, with quiet, precise motion, he raised his right hand into a salute. Not mockingly, not hesitantly. It was formal, practiced, meant. Every voice died. The phones lowered. The jokes faded. The only sound was wind cutting across the runway. A few officers shifted their feet, unsure whether to salute too or pretend they hadn't seen anything at all. No one knew what to say. The woman didn't speak. She didn't nod. She just stood there with her hands behind her back, the corner of her torn jacket flicking in the breeze. The live stream had stopped recording, but it was too late. The silence had already said more than any camera ever could. And for the first time since she landed, the airbase stopped laughing. Nora Grey lived in a town most people couldn't find on a map unless they were lost or born there. One grocery store, a post office with a creaky door, and a diner where your coffee cup never emptied. She kept to herself in a little house at the edge of an old airstrip that hadn't seen commercial use in years. The neighbors called her Miss Nora, even if no one really knew whether she preferred the title. She wore the same faded green jacket every day, the one with patches sewn by hand, and a tear near the elbow. Her boots were scuffed from gravel, not fashion, and her jeans had more miles on them than some people's cars. She didn't wear makeup not because she was making a statement, but because she didn't see the point. Her hands were always marked with grease or ink, and she often tied her hair back with a piece of cord instead of a band. There was no ring on her finger, no photos on her walls, just maps, journals, and tools sorted by sound rather than color. The kids in town knew her for the shed behind her house where broken bicycles, drones, and even lawnmowers got a second life. She didn't charge them for repairs. She just showed them how to fix things themselves, guiding with her hands more than her words. They said she had a way of explaining that made you believe you could build an airplane out of nothing but scrap and willpower. She rarely went to town meetings, but she showed up when the school needed help rebuilding a broken AV system, or when someone's old truck wouldn't start in winter. She'd bring her own thermos work without being asked and leave before the thank yous piled up. People noticed her only after she was gone. Nora had once worked for one of the biggest defense contractors in the country. Her name used to sit on blueprints filed in secure vaults tied to projects too advanced for press releases. She was a systems engineer, the kind who could troubleshoot a crashing interface in mid-air while explaining Bernoulli's principle to a pilot with a cracked radio. But that life ended almost 10 years ago. No one in the town knew why she left. Some guessed burnout, others assumed loss. All she ever said was that she preferred the sky when it wasn't filled with noise. Whatever happened before, she never brought it with her. She folded it away like she did her maps tucked behind, things edges worn smooth. She lived with rhythm. Up before dawn, coffee black, A quick jog down the airfield's gravel-lined boots soft against the dirt. Her hangar was her sanctuary. Old planes with names like Charlie and Midge lined up in different stages of repair. She spoke to them under her breath as if they answered back. Inside, everything had a place. She logged hours in a notebook, not a tablet. She charted flight paths by hand. The radio stayed off unless weather demanded it. She said you couldn't feel the air properly if too many signals were running through your head. Most people saw a woman out of place. Her clothes didn't match the time. Her habits didn't match the town. But for those who took a second look, there was something magnetic in her stillness, a kind of weight that didn't press down but held firm. She didn't try to be respected. She simply moved, like someone who had nothing to prove. She volunteered at the middle school twice a week. Not officially. She just walked in with a toolbox and helped kids rebuild an old flight simulator that had stopped working 5 years ago. The students adored her. They said she never made you feel stupid even when you were. She never missed a funeral. She never gossiped. She never left a mess behind. Nora was the kind of person you noticed most when she wasn't there. She didn't talk much about herself, but if you listened closely, her silence said more than most people's stories. Every once in a while, a plane would fly low overhead one of the military jets from a base further west. She would stop whatever she was doing and look up, not long, just a glance. Then she'd return to her work, her expression unreadable. Her mailbox was always empty except for aviation magazines she never subscribed to but always received. Some had articles she'd clearly already read, dog-eared and underlined. One neighbor claimed he once saw a letter with a government seal arrive at her door, but when asked about it, she only smiled and said it was probably a mistake. When her plane took off that morning, no one paid much attention. It was quiet, unremarkable, like so much of her life. Just an old woman in an older plane charting a path no one else could see. But for those who had watched her work, who had seen her walk into a room and make it steadier, without speaking, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like the beginning of something none of them understood yet, like watching a storm roll in without clouds. She was never loud, never in the way, but wherever Nora Grey went, the ground beneath her seemed to hold its breath. The sun hadn't risen yet when Nora stepped into the cold morning air. The gravel cracked softly beneath her boots as she made her way across the field. Fog clung to the grass in thin strips, and the hangar door groaned as she pulled it open. Inside, the smell of oil and earth settled like memory. Her plane sat waiting, quiet and worn. She ran her hand along the wingtip like a ritual, checking for rough edges. Everything she needed was already packed. A folded paper map, the corners bent from use. A small photo tucked into the logbook, edges smudged but still clear. A face smiled back at her from behind dark sunglasses too big for a child that small. She didn't bring a phone. There was no tablet or GPS. The cockpit held no screens, only dials, needles, and switches. She had calibrated herself. She didn't trust machines she couldn't open or signals she couldn't see. She moved through her checks with the kind of ease that came from years, not months. The fuel cap was tight. The flaps moved with clean clicks. The propeller turned under her hand like it knew her touch. By the time the first bit of light broke over the hills, the engine was rumbling low. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. She pulled on her headset and adjusted the mic, though she didn't plan to use it much. The radio stayed silent. The airstrip had no tower, just wind and instinct. She looked once more at the map. A red pencil line curved along a river, then vanished into forest. No notes, no markers. She strapped in, ran through the startup again, and gave the throttle a slow push. The wheels bumped across the uneven strip, kicking up bits of dust behind them. Then the nose lifted and the earth let go. The sky opened without question. Below her, the town shrank into patches of gray and green. The school, the water tower, the house with the weather vane shaped like a horse. None of it paused. Nora didn't speak. She adjusted the trim, leaned slightly forward, and steadied the plane into climb. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. No smile, no frown, just purpose. There was no farewell. No one stood by the hangar waving or wondering. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving, and no one had asked. As the clouds thinned and the sun climbed higher, the light caught the photo taped to her dash. It fluttered once, then settled back. Her fingers tapped the edge of the logbook, flipping to a page filled with hand-sketched coordinates. The engine hummed low and constant, like it had made this flight 100 times. But this wasn't a route you found on charts. This was something else, something she had planned for long before the day began. In that small cockpit, she was alone. No chatter, no noise, just the hum of flight, the pull of gravity letting go, and a map only she understood. Wherever she was going, it didn't have a name, but she knew exactly how to get there. Somewhere over the tree line, Nora's plane crossed an invisible boundary. On her console, a red light blinked, once, then went dark. The transponder, old and analog like everything else she flew, gave one final pulse before falling silent. She didn't react. Her eyes scanned the dials, made a small adjustment to her heading, then turned the radio dial by instinct. No signal returned. No one responded. Her hand moved without hesitation, steady on the yoke. Inside a distant control room, a low alarm buzzed to life. On a glowing screen, a slow-moving blip slid across a slice of restricted airspace. It had no ID tag, no digital signature, just motion steady and unauthorized. A tech leaned forward, called for confirmation. Another voice shouted for someone higher up. In seconds, the room was full. Chairs scraped, monitors zoomed. Someone asked if it could be a drone. Someone else laughed and said no drone flies that ugly. The supervisor stepped in, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. He asked for intercept. A second screen lit up. 2 F-16s were already in the air, their routes adjusted with surgical precision. Engines screamed overhead as they banked into formation. From the sky, Nora's plane was a dot with wings. Its propeller hummed low, the sound nearly drowned in wind. She didn't know the jets had launched. She didn't flinch. She leaned closer to her map, drawing a line in pencil against the shapes below. In the cockpit, the only sound was the creak of old metal and the whisper of air through the vents. She adjusted her altitude with care, dropping a few feet to account for the slope of the ground. Her breathing stayed even. On the ground, chatter thickened. Someone in the control room joked that they were chasing down a grandmother in a lawnmower. Another said she was probably heading to bingo in restricted airspace. Laughter echoed, but no one turned off the sirens. The jets closed in fast. From the tower, their approach looked surgical. One came in from the left, the other from behind. Both dropped speed but held altitude. They weren't playing. Nora saw them before they called. 2 sleek shapes sliding into view like predators from a fog. Her expression didn't change. She reached for the radio switch but waited. Her hand hovered steady, but aware. Then the voice came in sharp and clipped, demanding immediate descent. Behind it, static cracked. Another voice chimed in, more casual, calling her a first-time flyer. One of the pilots laughed, said it looked like she borrowed the plane from a museum. She answered with a calm tone, confirming descent and giving coordinates. No excuse, no panic. She moved her hand to reduce throttle and eased the plane lower. The frame rattled gently, but she didn't fight it. The jets flanked her now, one on each side. Inside the control room, someone called it a box maneuver. The room clapped. One person hit record. Nora didn't hear any of that. She was flying, not responding. Down below, fields blurred past. The sky pressed closer. The jets circled but kept their distance. One pilot muttered into comms that the target didn't seem scared. Another said she was too old to understand what was happening. None of them could explain why the woman in the cockpit hadn't missed a single cue, or why even now she flew like the sky was hers. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a light bounce, and the old plane rolled to a clean stop just outside the central hangar. No alarms blared, no smoke trailed. It was a textbook landing. Still, the moment the propeller slowed, a convoy of vehicles surrounded her. Officers poured out, shouting over each other. "Hands up! Out of the cockpit! Don't move!" They aimed rifles at her windshield like they expected her to fight back. Nora didn't. She powered down the engine, undid her harness, and reached for the handle with the same quiet rhythm she'd started the morning with. As her boots touched the ground, 2 officers moved in and grabbed her arms. One twisted her wrist harder than necessary. The cuffs clamped tight metal, biting into her skin. She said nothing, didn't resist, just stood still as they dragged her a few steps away from the plane. A third officer pulled her canvas flight bag from the cockpit and dropped it onto the concrete. The zipper split open with a single pull. Out spilled a map, a protein bar, and a notebook thick with hand-drawn routes. One man picked up the bar and held it in the air like he'd found a weapon. He laughed and turned to a nearby phone already live streaming. He said she was probably flying cross-country powered by peanuts. Another called her a sky mechanic. Someone watching from the control tower took a screenshot of her with her arms behind her back and sent it to a group chat with the caption suspect in thrift store camo. Laughter rippled from inside the fence line. Jake stood near the rear of the group, arms folded, mouth tight. He was the youngest officer there, only a year past training, still new enough to follow orders without knowing when to question them. He didn't say anything, but he watched Nora carefully. She looked straight ahead, her eyes scanning nothing in particular. Calm. Silent. Her breath rose in small clouds in the morning air. The cuffs pinched at her jacket sleeve and a thin thread of blood trickled down her wrist. She didn't blink. One of the men kicked her notebook to the side. Another snapped a picture of it on the ground like it was evidence. They ignored the rest of her things except to laugh at how outdated everything looked. One said the maps probably led to alien treasure. The live stream kept going. Then the photo slipped from her bag. It fluttered once, then settled face up in a patch of dirt near her boots. The child in the picture looked maybe 5, wearing oversized sunglasses and smiling like the world was made of summer. No one noticed it. No one bent down. It just sat there, half covered by dust, forgotten. They moved her toward the waiting vehicle, a black van with no windows. The man filming muttered something about putting Grandma in timeout. Another commented that she looked too calm for someone who just violated federal airspace. Jake watched her as she walked past. She didn't look scared, didn't even look confused. She moved like someone who had already planned for every part of this, like every step had already been measured, and that more than anything made his skin prickle. He glanced down once at the photo before it disappeared beneath another boot. Then he looked back at her, and for the first time since she landed, he wondered what kind of person stayed this quiet when the whole world was shouting. The live stream didn't stop. It only picked up more eyes. Comments rolled in faster than the feed could keep up, full of laughing faces, flame icons, and jokes about old ladies stealing planes. Someone tagged it with a caption calling her Sky Granny. The name stuck. One officer stepped closer and yanked on the cuff chain, pulling Nora slightly off balance. Her jacket tore at the shoulder where the fabric caught. Threads split with a faint sound, barely louder than the wind. She didn't react. Her stance stayed level, boots rooted to the pavement, like nothing could move her unless she allowed it. Another officer nudged her notebook with his boot, sending it skidding a few feet. A third leaned in and asked if she even knew what airspace meant. Nora didn't lift her head. Her mouth stayed closed, her eyes forward. Not cold, not lost. Focused. Jake stood behind the others, half in shadow, arms crossed so tightly his knuckles were white. He watched her more than them. He watched the way her shoulders didn't tense, the way she didn't flinch when they poked or laughed. It made him uncomfortable, and he didn't know why. He had seen people scared before. Seen them plead, cry, shout. She wasn't doing any of that. Her silence wasn't empty. It was full of weight, like she had already done this before, maybe more than once, and didn't need anyone to understand why she wasn't afraid now. The tear in her jacket fluttered in the breeze. Her hands cuffed behind her were bruised but steady, not clenched, not shaking. Still. Someone behind Jake made another joke. Another camera clicked. More faces laughed through screens. Nora stood at the center of it all, unmoving. And slowly, something shifted in Jake's chest. It wasn't just discomfort anymore. It was shame. He realized they weren't in control. Not really. They were loud. But she was winning. Not because she fought back, but because she didn't need to. Every second she stood there without responding made their cruelty look smaller. Jake lowered his arms and looked at the others. Then he looked back at her and knew. She wasn't confused. She wasn't broken. She was watching them the way a pilot watches weather, reading patterns, tracking pressure. She had already seen worse than this. And whatever they thought this moment was, it wasn't the whole story. Not even close. The landline rang in the operations room. Not the radio, not the satellite line. The old desk phone with the curled cord that almost never lit up unless it mattered. A lieutenant glanced at it, confused. Then he looked at the room's supervisor, who gave a silent nod. The officer picked it up. His voice was steady at first. Then it changed. He straightened as he listened. His hand gripped the phone tighter, and the color drained slightly from his face. When he hung up, he didn't speak. He just stood there for a second, eyes wide, like he'd seen something no one else could. Another phone started ringing. This time it was a secure line on the far desk. A different officer answered. He nodded quickly, then looked across the room and called for everyone to clear the channel. No one asked why. Outside, the scene around Nora hadn't changed. She was still cuffed, still silent, still surrounded by officers who thought they were in control. But inside, the base had already shifted. Whatever was coming had begun with that call. Within minutes, the sound of engines echoed through the air. A convoy of black SUVs pulled through the main gate. No sirens, no lights, just smooth black paint and tinted glass. The vehicles didn't hesitate. They moved like they had done this before. Jake saw them first. He stepped forward, just slightly squinting toward the hangar as the first SUV came to a stop. Doors opened in sync. A man stepped out from the lead vehicle. No uniform, no visible badge, just a dark tailored suit, a clean tie, and a face that didn't smile. He didn't stop to talk to anyone. He walked straight across the tarmac, his shoes clicking with quiet finality. Everyone watched him. No one moved. He stopped in front of Nora and looked her in the eyes. Then, without a word, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. Not slow, not uncertain. It was sharp, practiced exact. A military salute from someone who knew what it meant and who he was giving it to. The air changed. Officers who had been laughing minutes earlier froze in place. Someone lowered their phone without realizing it. Another dropped a clipboard. The live stream stopped. The man spoke her name. Commander Grey. Not Miss. Not Ma'am. Commander. The rank was clear. The tone left no room for doubt. And just like that, everything that had happened before no longer felt like a joke. No one had seen it coming. Not with her old jacket. Not with her beat-up plane. But this wasn't a mistake. She wasn't lost. She had been following orders they couldn't even guess existed. The man didn't look at anyone else. His eyes stayed on her. He said the delay had been corrected, that her mission window could still hold. He asked if she was ready. She gave one nod, slight but sure. Around them, the silence deepened. Officers who had cuffed her now shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down. Jake took a small step back and felt his face go warm. Nora hadn't said a word yet, but she didn't need to. The salute had already spoken for her. The convoy, the phone calls, the man in the suit. It all pointed to one truth. They hadn't detained a threat. They had detained a commander. And now they were all standing in the wrong part of history. Mason stepped closer, the black coat of his suit catching the light as he turned slightly toward the officers nearby. His voice was measured, every word chosen with care. He called her Commander Grey again, louder this time, as if correcting the air itself. He said her presence in the airspace had been approved through a classified chain, that her transponder had gone dark by design, that her aircraft, her silence, even her lack of digital footprint was part of a larger operation they hadn't been cleared to know. The mission was live, and the delay caused by her detainment had already triggered a full debrief across agencies. No one interrupted. The same officers who had cuffed her stood still, faces tight, some blinking too much, others staring at the ground. A few looked like they wanted to disappear into their boots. The room had stopped breathing. Mason added that she was operating under deep cover parameters, that no prior announcement had been logged on purpose. He said this wasn't a stunt or an accident. It was orders, and they had broken protocol by treating her as a suspect. Nora hadn't moved. Her hands were still bound behind her back, though the cuffs now looked ridiculous, out of place, like something hanging on the wrong door. She waited until he finished. Then she spoke. "Leave the cuffs. The Admiral isn't here yet." It was the first thing she'd said since landing. Her voice was steady, soft, but not weak. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Mason didn't argue. He didn't try to soothe the moment or undo the tension. He simply nodded, once his face unreadable. Someone near the edge of the group shifted. Jake turned his eyes toward her, throat dry. He wasn't sure what hit harder, the fact that she'd spoken at all, or that the words weren't meant to punish, but to remind them all who she answered to. One of the older officers fumbled with a key, then stepped forward to unlock her wrists. Mason raised a hand to stop him. He would do it himself. He stepped behind her and removed the cuffs slowly, then pocketed them without a word. She didn't rub her wrists. She didn't thank him. She just stood straighter, and somehow she looked taller than before. The wind outside picked up slightly, curling through the open hangar doors. The torn fabric of her sleeve lifted again. No one laughed now. No one pulled out a phone. The room that had mocked her now watched her like something they were still trying to understand. It wasn't just a change in tone. It was a reckoning. She had endured all of it without flinching. And now, with one sentence, she had reminded them that silence can speak louder than any rank. Mason slipped the envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her like it was both fragile and classified. Nora took it without looking at him, tucking it under one arm like it was no different than a folded map. It was her updated clearance, her permission to finish what she'd started before they stopped her. There was no apology, no speech, just paper and silence. Mason didn't explain further. He stepped aside. Nora turned toward the hangar doors. She didn't rush. Her steps were even boots soft against the concrete. The path ahead of her was open, but the air behind her held weight. The first salute came from the far left, a quiet click of boots and a hand raised in instinct. Then another followed. One by one, the men who had mocked her only hours before straightened their posture and brought their hands to their brows. No one gave a command. It just happened. She didn't acknowledge it. She kept walking, her jacket shifting slightly with each step. Her face was calm, unreadable. Not proud, not angry, just steady. Jake stood near the back. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't move. He watched her pass like someone watching a mirror crack. Not in fear, in regret. She passed by him without turning her head. And still the silence around her grew. Not heavy, not awkward, just final. Like something had settled in that room that no one would forget. No one followed her. No one called out. She walked into the light pouring in from the open doors, the envelope still under her arm, the tear in her sleeve fluttering at her side. The cuffs were gone, but their mark lingered. The notebook they kicked now lay untouched beside the wall. The photo in the dirt had stopped fluttering. The hangar, once full of noise and laughter, felt like a place waiting to be forgiven. Outside, her plane sat where she left it unchanged. Inside, the officers stood still, watching her shape grow smaller, each of them knowing they had seen something they didn't deserve to forget. Jake lowered his eyes, not in shame for her, in shame for them. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or demand respect. She hadn't quoted protocol or listed credentials. She had stood still, spoken once, and reminded everyone what command really looked like. And now, without a word, she was leaving again. Not with drama, not with revenge, just with quiet that didn't ask for respect but left no room for anything else. The photo wasn't supposed to exist. It was blurry, taken from behind a glass panel with glare in the corner, but it caught the exact moment Mason raised his hand to salute a woman in a torn jacket with her hand still behind her back. It leaked within hours. No caption, no context, just a still frame that spread through military message boards and private pilot groups like wildfire. By morning, the forums were flooded with questions. Who was she? Why was she cuffed? Why did a federal officer salute her like that? Theories piled up fast. Some said she was CIA. Others claimed she was part of a retired flight program. One user posted an overlay of the photo with zoomed-in grain showing what might have been a faded insignia on her sleeve. They circled it in red and asked if anyone recognized the rank. The phrase "she doesn't need your apology" began showing up in comments, then posts, then screenshots turned into stickers. Pilots began taping thin black strips of cloth to their dashboards. They didn't say what it meant. They didn't have to. Jake stayed off the threads at first. He read everything. He watched people argue over what kind of plane she flew and whether analog navigation was even legal over restricted zones. He saw how they missed the point. So, he wrote something. He didn't use his name. He didn't mention the base. He didn't describe her face or the moment she finally spoke. He only described what it felt like to watch someone hold still while others tried to break her. The post was short. No hashtags, no demands, just memory and reflection. It ended with one line that others copied again and again. She didn't resist because she didn't need to. That quote landed harder than he expected. Veterans reposted it. Young cadets printed it on their lockers. A former commander from Utah wrote that it reminded him of the best officer he ever served under, one who never shouted but always had the room. Some people mocked the attention, called it overblown, but no one could look at the photo and pretend it meant nothing. The moment had already left its mark. And through it all, she never commented. never spoke to a reporter, never posted a single word. She didn't claim the story. She didn't have to. It had already moved without her, like wind through open hangar doors, quiet, precise, unshakable, just like her. The morning air was cool when Nora stepped back onto the gravel path leading to the hangar. The field looked the same, with tall grass swaying at the edges and rust creeping down the old fence line. No one waited. No voices called out. Just wind, soft and familiar. She moved with the same quiet rhythm as always. Her jacket was patched where it had torn. Her boots still bore the same wear. But something about the way she carried herself felt even more certain now. Like whatever weight she once held had shifted, not vanished, but settled. Inside the cockpit, the photo of the child was gone. In its place, taped gently to the dash, was a folded note. The paper was sharp at the edges, clean, intentional. Whatever it said was meant for no one else. Only the sky would read it. Beside the throttle lay a black coin. It wasn't shiny. Its surface was dulled smooth, like it had passed through many hands. The engraving was shallow but clear. One word: observed. She didn't linger. She didn't look around. She ran her hand once across the panel, checked the flaps, and slid into the seat. Everything clicked into place with familiar ease. The switches responded like old friends. No one came to film. No one watched from behind the fence. The world this time didn't rush to catch the moment, but the moment still held. She started the engine. It came alive with a low hum, steady and sure. The wheels rolled forward, lifting dust in soft curls behind them. The nose lifted and the plane rose cleanly into the sky. There was no radio chatter, no tower clearance, no signal flare or announcement, just Nora and the air, the same way it had always been. Somewhere below, a mechanic paused and looked up. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. But when her shadow passed overhead, he stood still and gave a small nod. The runway emptied behind her, but the presence remained, not as noise or legend, but as proof. Quiet strength leaves a trace, not in headlines or statues, in memory. The coin stayed in the cockpit. The note stayed folded, and Nora disappeared into the clouds again, unseen but never unnoticed. If this story moved, you take a moment to think about the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. The people who don't speak loud but lead with patience, who don't ask for recognition but carry the weight anyway. It's easy to misjudge what we don't understand, but sometimes the calmest person in the room is the one who's already been through the storm and walked out of it with grace. We'd love to hear what this story made you feel. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories that honor resilience, quiet dignity, and the strength people carry in silence, follow us. There's more to come.